Hello and good evening, everyone. Today we have a very special initiative from the India Community Center. It is called Diabesity, Understanding and Transforming Metabolic Diseases. We have today with us a very charismatic speaker, Dr. Pankaj Vich. He's the author of Turbo Metabolism, 12 Weeks to a New You, which has been translated into Polish from English recently. Dr. Vich, welcome.
Thank you.
And we also have Doug Amos. He's one of our health heroes, and he's here to share his story of how he's able to reverse the dreaded diabetes. And he's here to share his experiences with you and inspire you. But before we start, today is 11th September, probably one of the darkest days in the history of United States of America. We would like to take a few moments to honor the martyrs and victims of the 9/11 event. So let's observe a silence for 30 seconds. Thank you. And thank you for being with me and with all of us together in this. And now we can start our webinar. Before we begin, I quickly want to go over the goals of today's webinar. We are going to learn about the basis of diabetes as a metabolic disease, understand the role of diet, exercise, sleep, and stress in life transformation, and how we can employ motivational techniques to trigger behavior change. We will hear live not only from seasoned medical practitioner, but also from a patient here. And you can interact with Dr. Vich as well as Doug Amos, who are going to be interacting with you in the session. A couple of quick announcements before we start the webinar. India Community Center is hosting another event in Google Campus on September 14th. This weekend. It's called Diabetes Reversal Through Lifestyle Optimization. We have, again, Dr. Vidge as one of the speakers. And also we have Dr. Nita Shah. She's a very popular celebrity in India, and she has done extensive work on reversing diabetes. She has authored Reversing Diabetes in 21 Days and is the founder of Sharan India. You don't want to miss her speech. Please be there at Google Campus if you're in the area. We also have a couple of Googlers, Vivek Rao and Gurmeet Manku, who are there to share their story about diet and diabetes management. On September 28th, we have another event hosted by ICC. It's called The Power of Natural Healing. There we have Dr. Vidge, Dr. Vivek Shanbag, and Dr. Naras Bhatt, Dr. Rajesh Shetty, and Kusum Bhatt. They are all going to talk about how there are different natural ways of healing. Now, I hope to see you there. So we can now start the webinar on diversity. Dr. Vich, please take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidyangi, for that warm welcome and introduction. And I think it's very poignant that today happens to be September 11th. And we certainly took a moment of silence for the people who gave up their lives on September 11th. But today's webinar is about celebrating life. For those of us who are still fortunate enough to be alive, the goal is to have the highest quality life possible, to have the most life in your years, not only years in your life, but also the most life in your years, to be the best version of yourselves. And with that in mind, we're really proud to bring our first webinar, which is treating the root causes to prevent and reverse diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. These are the biggest killers. These are the biggest drains on our economy from a healthcare standpoint. And we know that when we treat the causes, we can actually make you better. And as Vedyangi said in her introduction, we have an example of someone who's done that himself. He's one of many people, actually. He's one of many health heroes who has transformed their own lives. And more than my presentation, I'm excited to hear from Doug Amos, who is our health hero, who you'll be hearing from in the latter part of the hour. And so weight matters, right? Everybody was worried about their weight. They want to be at a certain weight because they want to look like Priyanka Chopra or they want to have six-pack abs. But really, weight matters, but not why you think. Weight matters because obesity is the number one cause of preventable disease and disability. Yes, it's obesity. It used to be smoking, but with more and more people quitting smoking, with less than 18% of the US population still smoking, obesity has become the number one cause of preventable disease and disability. And our number one killers, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, cancers, are associated with obesity. We're going to be focusing on type 2 diabetes and metabolic disease today. And we know that over 80% of type 2 diabetes is associated with obesity, especially belly fat. So we really care about belly fat, which happens to be a big problem in South Asians. We tend to store fat in our belly, in our internal organs. We don't get big arms and big legs, but we have big bellies. And that's a problem because when you have extra fat in the internal organs, it starts accumulating in the liver and the pancreas, in the blood vessels, in the muscles. That's what leads to insulin resistance, which goes from pre-diabetes to full-blown type 2 diabetes and the complications of diabetes, which some of which you see on the screen. The biggest ones being cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, but then also microvascular complications of affecting the eyes, where it can make you blind, of affecting the kidneys, where you can go into kidney failure, of affecting the nerves, where you experience numbness and tingling and eventually loss of sensation, which can lead to amputations of the extremities. It's a really serious problem.
Excuse me, Dr. I have I think the slides have not been launched. They're not visible. Can we launch the slides?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So
I think you need to share your screen. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's go here. I might have to start all over again. So I go to
that's okay.
share. And you see it now?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Go ahead. Please.
Right. So yeah, like thanks for pointing that out because I hadn't gone too far. And I was saying that weight matters, but not why you think. Weight matters because it's associated with health problems.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have to be thinking. So the other very scary statistic is that every other person in the United States, that's right, 50% of the population, right now it's about a third, but 50% of the population will be obese in the next decade. And as I said, there's a really strong correlation with diabetes and metabolic diseases with obesity. So as more and more people become obese, more and more people will have diabetes, high blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, all the diseases that are associated with being overweight. That's why weight matters, not because you want to look a certain way or fit in a certain dress size. But there's good news and there's bad news. And when I do this talk in public, I always ask, you want to hear the good news or the bad news first? And most people say, well, tell me the good news first. But I'm going to tell you the bad news first. The bad news is that there's no quick fix. There's lots of crash diets. Every day you flip on the television and there's a new crash diet on the screen. Some so-called experts touting their own solutions. Crash diets come crashing down. Calorie restriction might work in the short term, but it doesn't really work in the long term. Calorie restriction fails. So does willpower and hypnosis. It's a gimmicky thing. It might work for a very short time, but it doesn't really work in the long term. There's lots of herbal supplements that you'll see advertised. And Dr. Oz has become famous for bringing herbal supplements on his show. And most of them are a hoax, whether it's Garcinia cambogia or green coffee beans or ephedra or mahuan. There's so many that have come and gone. And they're a hoax. It's like selling snake oil. Liposuction. What is liposuction? Lipo means fat and suction means to suck it out. So in liposuction, you literally suck fat out. That should work, right? Well, the bad news is that liposuction only sucks the fat which is under the skin. It doesn't really get into the belly fat, the fat that's in the organs. So that doesn't really help either. So what causes insulin resistance? Well, I alluded that a little bit in my introduction. Essentially, it is intramyocellular fat, or fat in the internal organs, particularly the liver, pancreas, and the muscles. First, the liver gets overloaded with fat. It's trying to help you. It's like a filter. It's grabbing all this extra fat and storing it. It'll say, I'll take it, so the rest of the body doesn't have to suffer. But a time comes when that filter becomes clogged. And then that circulating fat, those circulating lipids start overflowing into the other organs. They affect the pancreas, that directly affects insulin secretion. And this fat gets deposited in the muscle, thereby impairing the ability of insulin to work. And eventually the fat actually starts depositing in the arteries as well, which leads to plaque formation in the arteries, and they block, and you end up with a heart attack or a stroke or get blind. But the underlying causes are related to lifestyle. What leads up to this insulin resistance? It's a diet, and it has an excess of refined carbohydrates, it's fat overconsumption. And where do we get refined carbohydrates and unhealthy fat? We get it from processed food, junk food, and convenience food, which happens also to be low in fiber and low in micronutrients. And by micronutrients, we mean those disease-fighting, health-promoting nutrients that are needed in microscopic quantities by the body, vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals that are in plants that help us to stay strong and to be able to fight infections and to fight cancer and stay healthy and strong.
Dr. Vidge, I'd like to interrupt at this point. There is a question from one of the audience members.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'd like to address the audience briefly. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will spell out the questions to Dr. Vidge or Doug. Please feel free to type your questions in so that if you're not audible, we can still read your question. And you can ask your questions throughout the webinar. There is no restriction. So we have our first question. The first question says, is diabetes reversible? Can you reverse diabetes?
Absolutely, and that's a really good question, and that has been the topic of my research and my learning over the last decade. And it turns out that there's quite a bit of research in the literature if you look at reversibility, right? There's quite a bit of literature that shows that you can reverse diabetes, type 2 diabetes, especially if it's recent onset, especially in the first decade of having the disease. You can definitely reverse it. In my own practice, I've got several dozen examples of people who've done that. As I said earlier, we have someone with us this evening who's done that, and it is something that can happen. It correlates with weight loss. The more weight that you lose, the better the insulin works. But there are studies in which you can reverse diabetes even without that much weight loss. And we'll get to how you do that in just a few moments. So we continue?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'll let you know if there are more questions. I'll just interrupt you. I'll let you know. Thank you. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's fantastic. So here's the thing, it's not surprising that we have this obesity epidemic and 50% of the population is going to be obese in the next decade, because we're hardwired to eat food when it's available and hold on to fat. We're hardwired to have an appetite and to seek out foods that are high in sugar and fat. Why? Because we have evolved in conditions of food scarcity. For 7 million years, humans have been walking the planet searching for food and eating what they can, often hunting and gathering whatever they can. So if something is really palatable, if it's colorful, if it's sugary, if it's fatty, we would have had an evolutionary advantage in grabbing that food and craving it when it's not available. But the problem is that now we've changed the conditions to where we have an abundance of calories, we have an abundance of high sugar and high fat food. But that evolutionary advantage has turned into a disadvantage because the same habit of trying to seek that high calorie, high fat, high sugar food is working against us in an environment of abundant food. And coupled with that, we're moving less, we're sleeping less, and we're constantly stressed because we're connected to our work 24/7 with our wonderful devices, and we just don't, we forgot where the off button is. When you
So,
look at it in human physiology, there's this really complex feedback loop system where the gut, the liver, the pancreas, the fat tissues, and the brain all talk to each other.
okay.
And that's the problem.
Dr. Vij, we have another question. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you.
So this question is from Nandini Garud. She has a two-part question. The first part is, how can gut bacteria be enhanced to support health? The second part is, please comment on Indian microbiota and how we can support it in Western diet. Do you want me to repeat the question or?
No, I got it. I got it. So she's asking about gut microbiome, and this is absolutely the $1 million question that's being researched right now. And as it's turning out, it looks like much of the answers that we're seeking in reversing chronic diseases happen to lie in how we can have the healthiest gut microbiome. Because it turns out that only 1% of you is you, the other 99% is bacteria. When you look at the DNA in your body, when you look at the hormones that are being produced, when you look at the biochemistry in your body, 99% is done by these gut bacteria, only 1% is you. So how do we have the healthiest gut bacteria is something that we're going to segue right into, and that's good news. The good news is that treating the root causes will prevent reverse diabetes, obesity, heart disease. And the way that you're going to have these healthy gut bacteria is by putting the right food for the gut bacteria inside your body. This is 80% of the answer. I repeat this, 80% of the answer is in making every bite count. When you have the right soil, you'll automatically grow the right bacteria in that soil. And those of us that have gut dysbiosis or have an unhealthy population in our guts is simply because of the food choices that we have been making. And we can absolutely do that on a South Asian, on an Indian diet too. If you look at the traditional diet, it's a very colorful diet, very high in fiber, with lots of vegetables, not just starchy vegetables. We're not just talking about cauliflower and potatoes, but all the different colors that you see from the zucchini and the carrots and the eggplants and the bell peppers and the tomatoes and the onions and the garlics and the mushroom. When you have a diversity of these foods, when you're eating 40 different plant foods in a week, that's the strongest correlate of having a healthy gut bacteria population. It's better than taking the most expensive probiotic in the world. 40 different plants a week. Think about that. That there's 7 days in a week, you want to have 6 or 7 different plants and you're not repeating. So at the end of the week, you had 40 different plants. You should be able to name them. That means fruits and vegetables. That's what plants are. Because let's face it, 80% of your health is food. Everything else is 20%. Exercise, sleep, stress, social connections, supplements, you name it, it's going to come in the other 20%. 80% of what happens to you in terms of your physical and mental health is related to food. So if you can take one thing home from this webinar, it will be to shift your thinking to start thinking about food as medicine, not as entertainment. Food shouldn't be your source of entertainment or for getting therapy. It should be thought of as a way that you nourish and nurture your body, because that's what it is. And from this food, we're taking in energy plus intelligence. Energy could be the calories, the protein, the carbohydrates, the fats, but intelligence is that stuff that you can't really measure, but it's bringing your body life. It's bringing prana. It's bringing life force into the body. And when every bite counts, you can bring energy intelligence from every bite into the body and activate its own natural healing mechanisms. So that's how you would get a healthy bacteria population in your gut. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, Dr. Vij. Yeah, thank you so much for the answer. So, yeah, you can proceed with your next segment. I don't think we have any questions as of now. I'll let you know. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So the other part of eating is meal timing and frequency. And this is a really fascinating research that's going on right now too, looking at the benefits of intermittent fasting. And when we look at our own South Asian heritage, one of the best known people from India is Mohandas Gandhi, and he was known to be eating once or twice a day because that was the norm. And he would go on long fasts, sometimes for a month at a time. He wasn't a big guy, he wasn't a 300-pound obese person, but the body activates its own healing mechanisms and gets rid of stored energy and also stored toxins when we go on intermittent fasting. An easy way to do that would be to eat your meals earlier in the day and eat maybe 1 or 2 meals a day, have them earlier in the day. Why earlier in the day? Because that's when we have higher insulin sensitivity. And again, so many religious and cultural traditions talk about not eating after sunset. And that's a really good idea because your body needs that time to heal, to rest, to digest, to come back to its baseline when you're not constantly putting more raw material into the assembly line. So it's meal composition and meal timing and frequency. And the third part of this is to really understand hunger, right? Hunger, true hunger is when your stomach is empty. Oftentimes we mistake that for other things. It could be an emotional hunger. You're not really hungry, you're angry, you're lonely, you're tired, you're bored. That's not hunger. It could be a craving just because you drove by a certain restaurant that's blowing out of their exhaust fan a certain smell that you really like. And they're doing that on purpose to attract you to come in and order something from there. Could you have a low blood sugar? That's not hunger, right? That's a physiological condition, probably because of the meal choices that you made at the previous meal. Are you just bored? Are you looking for variety? Could you be thirsty? These are some of the things to think about to try to distinguish hunger from craving. So food is absolutely the most important component of this. When you're looking at reversing disease, think about food first because 80% of health is going to be about food choices.
Dr. Witch, there's another question here. The question is from Jyoti Rupre. She's asking, can we have ginger or turmeric or cardamom seeds during intermittent fasting? Okay, she says carom seeds. I'm sorry, not cardamom. It's
Hi,
ginger.
Jyoti. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you can. When we're talking about intermittent fasting, so it's being researched right now, and we don't really have a clear agreement on how you define fasting. But most of the experts agree that if you're having something that's non-caloric, some black tea or black coffee, even with some ginger and cardamom or carom seeds, that should be fine. That should be okay because you're not putting a caloric load into the body. And if you can get by for a few hours just by having some hot water with some ginger in it, more power to you. Absolutely. Great question. Thank you, Jyoti, for that.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question from Jyoti, and she's asking, please tell us more about intermittent fasting. I am doing 16 hours fasting.
That's fantastic. And that's really a good, easy way to start, right? It doesn't require any special training or any special conditions. We are almost fasting for 16 hours anyway. So what someone who's fasting for 16 hours is eating for 8 hours. So they could start eating at say 9 in the morning and they're done with their last meal of the day at 5 p.m. And much of the research shows that when you eat in this way compared to someone who's eating the exact same foods, the exact same calories, the weight loss is better in people that are restricting that feeding window. So this is time restricted eating is what Jyoti, what you're doing. And this is a great way to start. And if you want to be more adventurous, you might decide to go on a water only fast for say 1 day a week and see how that feels and build on that. But again, in this program, in our practice, we've had many people that have done that and had really phenomenal results. But one caveat there is that if you're on medicines, if you're on diabetes medicines like insulin, metformin, glipizide, if you're on blood pressure medicines like metoprolol, atenolol, amlodipine, losartan, lisinopril, you have to be a little bit careful because if going for a long period of time without any food, your blood sugar or your blood pressure could drop because of that medicine and you may get into trouble. So you have to be a little bit cautious there And anything longer than a 16-hour fast, intermittent, time-restricted eating should be done under supervision.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vijay. Thank you. So I have a request for all the audience on the webinar. Please mute your microphone. If you're not talking into it or participating, please mute. Or uh, I think the webinar host can do that. Please mute. We have some noise, background noise. All right. Thank you. Dr. Vich, please proceed.
Wonderful. So we're done with 80% because 80% is food, and the rest is going to be pretty easy. The second piece is physical activity, is of moving the body like it's designed to be moved. But I'm not talking about going on the treadmill, because everybody does that, goes on the treadmill or the exercise bike. What most of us neglect is resistance exercise. And guess what? Your muscles are your best friends, because your muscles will burn fat even at rest. And you can activate the large muscles of the body without belonging to a fancy gym or having expensive equipment. You can do it by using your own body weight, by doing things like push-ups, pull-ups, lunges, squats, planks. These are all things that you can do using your own body weight to activate those muscles. When you load the muscles, they're activated to burn more fat, and they're burning more fat even at rest. Not to mention that load bearing is the only way that you can maintain or build more bones. So those of us that are worried about osteoporosis should really be thinking about load bearing exercises much more than taking any supplement or medicine to have healthier bones. The most important thing that you can do to have healthy bones is to load them. Think about body weight exercises. Think about a quick workout that you can do in 20 minutes. Even in the middle of the day at the lunch hour, it doesn't have to be at a dedicated time and place in a fancy gym. The third piece is sleep. And sleep is perhaps the most neglected master lever of health. We care about sleep because we know that subjects who are sleep deprived have higher appetites. We see that in the hospital and people doing shift work all the time. People that are sleep deprived, that are working at night, crave foods that are high in fat and sugar. They're going for the potato chips and the donuts or the samosas and the laddus because you're hungry, you're craving those foods as a stress relief mechanism when you're actually sleep deprived. And in clinical settings, we've shown that you can actually create insulin resistance. You can make somebody diabetic in as little as 3 days. Yes, as little as 3 days when you deprive them of sleep. And what's also interesting is that melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, has some action on the pancreas, because we know that the pancreas has melatonin receptors. And every time I think about that, I just blows my mind that why would the pancreas have melatonin receptors? Because there's a sleep and obesity connection. And this goes back to the time restricted eating thing as well. So don't get up and eat at night. The fourth piece is mindfulness, is stress reduction, is of accessing the peace and calm that's available to all of us at all times, right? We're spiritual beings living in a physical body. We think that this world around us, the physical things around us is all that is, but we're much more than that. And we all have this space of quiet, peace and quiet that we can go to. When we do that, we go into rest and digest mode. The stress hormones go down, cortisol levels go down, noradrenaline levels go down, and we can actually heal the body. We can actually heal the pancreas and the liver and allow those healing mechanisms to help us to restore us back to ideal health. And a lot of it's about setting the environment for success, right? I can decide that I want to do something, but unless my environment is set up to help me succeed, it becomes very, very difficult. And I'm talking not just about the physical environment, right? You go to a peaceful place, you become instantly calm and peaceful. You put the right foods in the refrigerator, you take out all the trash, it automatically by default grab those foods that are available to you that you put there on purpose. But there's also the social environment and the psychological environment. So social environment is the people that you surround yourself with, and psychological environment is the mindset of deprivation, a mindset of, hey, I have to do this versus I want to do this and I'm making this choice. Again, I'm choosing to nurture and nourish my body. I'm choosing to think about my food as nurturing and nourishing rather than thinking about food as entertainment. So the social environment is about surrounding yourself with people who care. We know that you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So flush out the negative energy, people that drag you down, and surround yourself with people who actually lift you up, who help you be the best version of yourself. There was a study in Harvard where they studied Harvard graduates for over 70 years. These are all smart people that got into Harvard, right? And many of them, most of them had very successful careers. But when they looked at their overall health and happiness, the ones that had the highest health and happiness were the ones with the strongest social connections. So social connections actually matter. And your social connections can also be your accountability partners, your coaches, people that help you stay on track, people that help lift you back up when you're feeling down. Research shows that when you're trying to do something difficult, having someone who's on your side, who's a companion, who's there to coach you and encourage you, makes the task 20% easier. So if you're trying to climb Mount Everest, it's going to actually decrease the altitude of the climb by 20% if you have a companion who cares, who wants to help you succeed, who's an accountability partner. So that's a really good reason to invest in your tribe.
So yeah, Dr. Vij, I think there's a question from Sachin Deshmukh. He wants to type it. He was wondering if he has to wait till the end of the webinar. Sachin, I think you can type the question now. Meanwhile, there was another question about gestational diabetes. How do your principles apply to gestational diabetes?
So it replies very strongly, and we know that women who have gestational diabetes, women who have developed diabetes when they're pregnant, that's what gestational diabetes is, has a lifetime incidence of 60%. So there's a 60% incidence of developing diabetes later in life if you had gestational diabetes. It's a really serious thing, right? Because pregnancy is a stressor on the body. And if diabetes became uncovered during that stressor, that means you have a very strong tendency to develop diabetes. So if you had gestational diabetes, that's a very powerful reason to be super careful and get on track with your lifestyle, with what you do with your forks, with your fingers, with your feet, how you manage stress, your sleep, and investing in your tribe. How much love do you have around you?
Okay. Dr. Vich, there's another question from Nandini Garuch. She asks, for diabetics who cannot tolerate beans and legumes and want to follow whole foods, plant-based diet, options for protein are limited and poultry and fish is resorted to. What can they do to avoid meat?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of confusion about how much protein we should be eating. And the fact is that you can get all your protein needs from plants. And in 20 years of practice, I've never seen someone in the hospital admitted because they have a protein deficiency. On the other hand, I've seen lots of people because they had too much protein and too much fat from the standard diet that we're eating. A much more important nutrient is fiber to think about. But getting back to your question, plant sources of protein do include beans and legumes. And if the issue is with digesting them, if you soak it overnight and drain the water and soak it again a few times, you can actually make them a lot more digestible and they don't produce such much gas. So that's one thing. Other foods, plant foods that would be high in protein would be things that come from soybeans and tofu. Tofu products are very healthy. No issue with any health problems. People in parts of the world that have a lot of tofu generally are much healthier than other populations in the West and even South Asia who don't. Peas are a good source. Uh, Nuts are a good source of protein. Flax seeds are a good, so nuts and seeds are good sources of protein. There's lots of plant sources of protein where you don't have to necessarily supplement by eating animal foods because you think that you're developing protein deficiency. And for an average middle-aged woman, the protein need is about 50 grams a day. For a man, it might be a little bit higher, 60 or 65. And you can actually get that even if you just ate broccoli for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. If you just ate broccoli and spinach all day, you will get enough protein. We know that cows and gorillas and bears have really large muscular bodies, and they're not eating other animals. They're eating mostly plants.
Okay,
So
great. So, Dr. Vish, there's a question from Basu Ulagadi. He's asking how to avoid to be a diabetic if one has a pre-diabetic condition. How can one avoid being a diabetic if you have a predisposition for diabetes or pre-diabetic condition?
right. So it's, even if you have a genetic predisposition to have diabetes, that's like, okay, I have a loaded gun in my pocket. So genetics can load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So it's only 20% genetics and 80% environment. 80% is choices that you make. And again, I have literally hundreds of people who've had pre-diabetes or insulin resistance and never went to progress to full-blown diabetes because they were following this way of life of eating a whole food plant-based diet, getting resistance exercise, getting enough sleep, focusing on stress, of investing in their tribe and social connections, and making sure that you don't gain weight and eat whole plant foods. You are going to guarantee yourself health, energy, and vitality. And it's not a one way street. It's not a death sentence. It's not a compulsory thing that you will develop diabetes because you have pre-diabetes, or even if you have a family history. You can make choices and essentially choose your own destiny. You can make chronic diseases optional by making the right choices in your lifestyle.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vich. Any more questions here? Uh, Okay, Naren is saying that Naren himself was an example of diabetes, sleep apnea, hiatal hernia and how he's able to reverse. So Naren endorses the guidelines which Dr. Vij has been sharing. He's a health hero himself, and he has been able to reverse the following conditions with lifestyle changes and the tips which Dr. Vij mentioned. We have a question now from Kamala. It says Kamala Shankar. So she's asking, white rice should be avoided for DM. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Again, you look at the longest lived populations of the world, you look at the blue zones, look at Okinawa. Okinawa is one of the classic places where they have a lot of longevity. Okinawans don't get obese, they live to over 100 years of age, and they were eating rice, they were eating yams, they were eating seaweed, they were eating, they would catch some fish every now and then, but it was essentially a high carbohydrate diet. I mean, you look at traditionally in India, they didn't have such a problem with obesity and diabetes until recently, and they've been eating rice in South India for the longest time.
Awesome.
So that's not the issue. The issue is not only what you include in the diet, but what you're excluding from the diet. If you're just eating rice and beans and you're sitting at a computer for 13 hours a day working at Apple, then you're probably going to develop diabetes. But if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, which does include a little bit of rice, but lots of colorful non-starchy vegetables too, and you're getting your resistance exercise, and you're getting to bed on time, you're disconnecting from your laptop, you're going to be fine with a little bit of rice.
Awesome. So we have another question from Sachin Deshmukh. I think after this we can take one more question because it's time for us to move to next speaker. So the question now is from Sachin Deshmukh. He's asking, what is the best way to monitor and regulate daily fat intake? And can you address if keto diet can be healthy for some people?
So the best way to monitor daily fat intake is to avoid added fats. So eat a whole food plant-based diet and don't add any oil. Yes, you can cook without oil. In fact, we've had full workshops where we've demonstrated no oil cooking. And it's delicious food. If you come to our conferences, we're often served this kind of food, which is whole food plant-based, no oil cuisine. In fact, where there will be a version of that in our event that's coming up in Sunnyvale on Saturday, the 14th, where we'll demonstrate a whole food plant-based, no oil diet. So it can absolutely be done. If you're getting some fat from plants, if you're eating a little bit of avocado or a handful of nuts every day, that's okay. But you don't need to pull out a calculator and weigh your food. You can make pretty good choices just by rule of thumb of eating a whole food plant-based diet, focusing on greens and beans and onions and mushrooms and berries and seeds, a little bit of fruit and nuts on the side is just fine. The
Awesome.
second question was about keto diet. Keto diet is, in essence, is a high-fat, low-carb diet. I don't recommend it. It works in the short term if you're trying to lose weight. In the long, well, first of all, there's no long-term studies on it. Neither is there any population in the history of human evolution over 7 million years that has actually survived or thrived on an 80% fat, 15% carbohydrate diet. So it doesn't exist. The study hasn't been done. We don't have any populations to show it. It's probably going to be a disaster if you do that for any longer than a few weeks. I don't
Okay.
recommend it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for your candid response. I think it's time we move on to presentation by Doug Amos. Thank you, Dr. Vich. It was an extremely insightful session.
I have a couple of slides. Can I just finish up?
Oh yeah, sure, sorry. Okay.
Just give me like 2 more minutes, so I'm almost done.
Okay.
Really, we're ending with why. You start with why. It's all about quality of life, figuring out your own purpose in life, and ending with that. And that's what motivational interviewing is all about. We figure out what it is that's important to you. You want to make connections, be loved, and love other people. You want to have beautiful experiences. You want to travel to Rome and Paris and climb Mount Everest. You want to learn new things and eventually grow and contribute. If you want to do that, you need to be in really good physical health and focus on your health and fitness first. And when you do that, you can make disease optional. Eating a nutrient-dense, plant-rich diet, whole unprocessed plants, fasting once in a while, looking at meal timing, move a lot, get the resistance exercise, make sleep a priority, lift heavy things, that's resistance exercise, get outside, get some sunshine, get some vitamin D, and give lots of hugs.
Awesome.
And that's the cover of my book. I just wanted to very proudly boast that my book, which you see on the screen, has now been translated to Polish as well. So it's in my first foreign language edition. And I'm very proud to share that with you. And with that, we'll turn it over to Doug.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Fitch. I think we still want more questions to be answered, but if that is the case, please join us on at our event at Google on September 14th. We can answer more questions about this.
And Vidyangi, it's going to be at the Sunnyvale campus of Google Cloud, not the main Google campus, but Sunnyvale.
Okay, the Sunnyvale Google campus. Please
Google
join
Cloud,
us.
yeah.
Yes. Please check out the schedule. It's available on icccrackthewellnesscode.org. I'm sorry. Again, the website is crackthewellnesscode.org. The schedule for Saturday is available there. With that, we'd like to welcome Doug Amos to present and share his amazing story as a health hero. Doug, over to you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and I'm glad to be here and to spread the good news is that you can get control of your health. And basically, I had several notes put aside for this, and Dr. Vij actually covered it, so I'm not going to bore you guys hearing it again. But I'll go through some basic steps, and probably the number one step in terms of recovery is recognizing that there is a need for recovery and to do something different from what you have been programmed to do for all your entire life by the culture, by the society, and by the things that you believe are true about nutrition. And that's no easy task because there's a $1 trillion industry that's putting disinformation out there all the time to confuse everybody in terms of what is right. So once you have been able to, either through Dr. Vij's book or through a lot of other resources, sort out what's real and what's not real, then you can do the other steps in terms of basically turning your health around. The other bit of good news here is the human body is always trying to heal itself. In other words, if you basically injure yourself and then suddenly you basically like hit your knee or something, and you're in pain. If you do absolutely nothing, but you don't re-injure it again by doing the same thing, then your body will naturally heal it. And that's the miracle that we've been able to live with. And the problem is we are creatures of pattern behavior. So if we've been taught that this is a healthy food, if it's not, like dairy, for example, or like meat and those things, if we basically say, well, that's not it, I'm not going to eat that stuff, and we identify things which we define as our food, and we internalize that, then what happens is we give our body a chance to heal. And that's really one of the miracles. The other thing, which is a tool, which when I started out, I was 268, 270 pounds, and now I'm about 100 pounds lighter than that. And one of the things which made a difference was getting a hold of a continuous glucose meter, which looks like this. And this is a Dexcom one, but there's a Freestyle Libre one, which is a little less expensive. But what that does, this takes a blood sugar measurement every 5 minutes, and you don't have to prick your fingers. And that is because if I was to ask Dr. Veach, what's the compliance rate for diabetic patients in terms of doing 5 or 6 times a day of clicking their fingers, probably the answer is 20%, if that, and probably less than that. This is a thing you put a sensor on, it collects the data, you get to see a pattern, and so you can eat a food, and then you can watch the pattern, in the next 30 minutes and see how does that food impact me? Because the truth is we're all a little bit different, and we respond glycemically to foods differently. And so we really need a way of doing this so that everybody doesn't get aspirin. Everybody, gets the food, which is medicine once again, of what is going to work for us. And so I would suggest and recommend all of you guys to check the continuous glucose monitoring out, and as a tool for you to develop the pattern of eating, which is healthy for you, develop the diet, which is optimal for you. And there was a period of time I was eating by my glucose meter. For example, if I woke up and my blood sugar was 160, I don't need to eat anything. I have plenty of sugar in my body happening right there. And if my blood sugar was down to under 100, then I could probably have lunch or have a meal and stuff like that. But actually, after a period of time, once you learn your pattern and once you learn what foods are healthy and work for you, then you might not even need to have the glucose monitor to basically follow the new pattern, because we are creatures of pattern behavior. So the food you ate yesterday is very similar, I would bet, from what you ate today and what you ate 2 weeks ago, because you define certain things as your food, and with that you go on. So the first step is saying, yes, there's a problem. And the second point is, what am I going to do about it? And frankly, modern medicine, Western medicine, really didn't know for a long time. And it's gotten a lot better now. And Dr. Veach is part of a movement physicians who basically are helping Western medicine in the United States become more responsive to the science in terms of what's going on. Some other things which I've used in terms of my own journey was basically saying, okay, what strategy? And I decided I was going to do all of the above strategy in terms of what works for me. And so I basically have tried fasting. I do intermittent fasting. I'm on a 1 meal a day program, which means I eat a meal around noon. And that's the only meal that I eat. I might have a handful of nuts in the afternoon, but there's no reason for me to go and go to a restaurant. It ends up I'm actually eating a lot of my meals at home, which I've taken to cook. My wife is shocked because, for a long time, I didn't cook at all and didn't know how to cook, but I have learned what I can have and learned how to prepare that. So even if everybody else in my family are eating something different, I can eat the foods which I need for my life. In other words, once you start looking at food as medicine, then you're not going to be tempted by, here, have this cheesecake, or here, have this other dessert, which will have a very bad glycemic hit on you, and that type of thing. So first of all, it also means that once you have the pattern which works for you, then you can stop listening to the advertising and the promotions and the trillion-dollar efforts that the industry has of trying to get you to join the crowd and eat your hamburger and have a good day and that type of thing. So
Doug, you mentioned about 10,000 steps in one of your promotional videos. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's your daily routine, and can you share a little bit about that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, being a normally lazy guy, for a long time, I didn't do any exercise. And then what happened was as I learned more, I said, that's not going to work. So I started a process of, walking, movement. And it's primarily, you want to keep moving, especially if you're a senior like I am, you want to keep moving so everything continues to work right. And so what they have found in the research and the studies is if you walk 10,000 steps, which is about 5 miles, that's the sweet spot where you're going to get the most benefit for the time you're going to be spending doing the walking, and which we'll call exercise. And so if you do 10,000 steps a day, that's like that's like taking another pill or getting a shot of insulin or something like that. It is truly a medicine. So not only is food medicine, but also movement and exercise is medicine. And Dr. Vij is quite correct in terms of, resistance training, and you don't have to join a gym. He just showed you some examples where you can get that resistance training with your own body by doing push-ups and planks and other similar types of things where you can use resistance basically to get the exercise.
Okay. So Doug, I just want to stop you for a little bit. Are there any questions for Doug from the audience? Please type it in the chat box. We have 6 more minutes to wrap up the webinar. If you have any questions, specific questions for Doug or even Dr. Vij at this point, either ways, you can type the question in the chat box. They're available to answer your questions. Yeah, Doug, please proceed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think if there was one thing to remove from your diet, low-hanging fruit for this, it would be remove dairy from your diet. Because it basically, aside from being toxic for you health-wise and stuff like that, there are plenty of plant-based alternatives which you can buy at the grocery store basically, so if you want cereal, you can have almond milk or cashew milk or some other milk, which is not animal based and stuff like that. And it's much healthier for you. And by the way, if you're one of those caffeine addicts who goes to Starbucks like I do every day, then you can have them put, almond milk or soy milk into your coffee, and they don't charge you any extra for that. So it's a low hanging fruit to do that. And if you can also reduce, restrict the amount of sugar, oil, and salt that you have in your diet, that's also probably, you get quite a benefit from that, because each of those things, causes problems, and the amount of calories per, tablespoon or teaspoon of oil is quite high. So it's basically, what you want to do to get better. Now, if you're looking at one of these new approaches like intermittent fasting or 10,000 steps a day, what the ideal thing is to program this into your life. So this is no longer a recommendation from some weird guy at the seminar. This has become something that you own. So, and how long does that take? Mysteriously, the reason why all of these programs say 21 days is it takes about 21 days psychologically for you to change a behavior. So if you say, okay, I'm going to start a 10,000 step, and by the way, you can start anytime. Even if you have, diminished health, by doing the things which are positive to you, you will basically reverse the conditions that you have. You can get back to a much healthier state. It's just doing that, but it's not going to happen with one episode. It's like making it a program and a commitment to yourself of what you want to do. So for me, it's like I get up every morning and I go over and I do 10,000 steps at a local mall. It's just walking. So it's not like I'm doing something, I'm not going to a fancy gym. I'm not spending money on this. It's like buy a pair of walking shoes and do 10,000 steps a day and measure it on a Fitbit or a similar product. They're very cheap and that type of thing. And that's like doing 80% of the value you would get from going to the gym. So whole food plant diet, basically identify things which are science-based that you're doing, as opposed to I'm trying to sell you a product-based. Yeah. And good luck with your journey.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. There's one question. It's open to both Doug and Dr. Witch. Either of you can take it. For someone with ideal BMI and weight, what is the benefit of limiting fat? Indians are mostly lacto-ovo-vegetarians. Changing diet to plant-based only is too much of a change. What is the benefit? Dr. Witch, do you want to take the question? Okay. Yeah.
Well, the idea is to activate the healing systems in the body that are already in place. Yes, Indians are largely lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and yes, India is the epicenter of obesity and type 2 diabetes, soon to be #1 in the world. So clearly maybe that was working a century or 2 centuries ago, when it was truly a third world country of people who were starving. Now, with increasing affluence and more availability of convenient processed foods, as the social fabric changes, as the dynamic changes, as there isn't somebody at home to cook a fresh meal made from fresh ingredients, and you're grabbing whatever you can on the way from a restaurant or using pre-made ingredients, there's a shift, and that's no longer working. So the bottom line is, if whatever you're doing is working for you, then go for it. But chances are, if you're tuned into this webinar, there's something that you want to improve in your life. And if you want to do something better, Just try it for a few weeks. Try it for 21 days and see how you feel. Even if you don't have diabetes, even if you haven't had a heart attack, just see how your energy levels are. Just see how you're sleeping. Just see how your mood is. See how your mental clarity is. You can decide for yourself.
And,
Okay,
and
great.
be optimistic about your prospects for success in this, because the body, once again, is on its own journey to heal you.
Yeah.
You just need to keep going in that direction and don't get in the way.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Vish. Thank you, Doug. Such amazing insights, and it is so achievable. You make it seem so practical, and it was a very simple language. You conveyed massive targets here to be achieved, reversing diabetes and cardiac conditions. So this was a great webinar, a great beginning to a series of webinars to come. Please stay tuned. Also, do not forget to check out the event on September 14th. The details are available in the chat box here, or you can go to crackthewellnesscode.org and please look at the upcoming events. On Saturday, there is also a free health testing and scanning by Stanford Healthcare team on site at the Google Sunnyvale campus, that is. So try to come to the event. It is between 9:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. And if you have any questions, reach out to us again at crackthewellnesscode.org. Thank you all for a wonderful webinar session, to the participants and the speakers, and have a good night. Thank you so much. Yeah.